Well, we are live anyway. What's going on?
It's good to be alive for a start. I say that because last night, as I couldn't sleep very well, whereas my daughter, bless her, decided that she wanted to watch the latest enthralling episode of Love Island, which is...
I can't be in the room when that's on. I either have to leave the room or I have to put headphones in to block it out. I cannot do it.
Yeah.
I just think this must be detrimental to me in some way.
Well, it certainly is. There's no doubt about it. My daughter wants to watch it and she apologised to me. She said, "I'm sorry, Daddy. I know you don't like it, but I want to watch it because everyone at school is talking about it." So clearly she doesn't want to feel excluded and she wants to be able to hold her own in conversation and know what everyone's talking about. So I get it, but it's appalling. I'm just like you. Literally, it comes on and within a minute I have to be out of the room or I'll tear the rest of my hair out. It's just one of those things. It's awful. I mean, I can't see... There's nothing positive about it at all. I can't say a single positive thing about it. I have a creaky chair. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. I know a while ago we did some sort of self-development type stuff, and in the self-development industry they say to be careful of sort of what you're absorbing into your mind. Like, be intentional about how you... what sort of things you're surrounding yourself with.
Yeah.
And as much as I don't do that, I don't take it as seriously as some might. I think that must have some sort of effect on your character in some sort of negative fashion.
Absolutely, yeah. It does. The thing is, it's like... I think, there are certain levels of awareness. If you consider that... a dog perhaps is less aware of things going on than a human, or a child is probably less aware of certain things in the adult world because they haven't learned these things, they haven't come across these things, than an adult is, and that certain adults are less aware than other adults. And I think it's a question of, really, when you think about it, what's the oldest a dog can ever live to? 12? And it doesn't... 15 maybe? It just doesn't have...
Not an exact science, but it's 7 years, isn't it?
7 per... Yeah.
Yeah.
So they never live... Certainly they never live to 20 years, a dog, even at the best, the longest living dogs, I'm sure.
Sounds like an interesting thing to Google.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing about them is, not only... Even if they had the same level of understanding, brain power, and the same ability to understand language and communicate and absorb new ideas, they still are never going to have the amount of experience that a human being has got, because they simply don't have enough time to absorb the amount of information and experience that human beings absorb. And so I think if you spend the time that you have got absorbing stuff like... no offence to people who like to read things like the Daily Express and the Sun and things like this, but if you absorb that level of culture, then you're kind of restricting your ability to grow as a person. And I think Love Island is one of those things. I sincerely hope that Rebecca, my daughter, will grow out of it. I'm very pleased to see that Lara, my younger daughter, has got no interest in it whatsoever. Now that's nothing detrimental to Rebecca. She's just at that age where she needs to feel included in society, and her current society at school, they're very interested in Love Island.
So I typed in longest living dog, and there's not like a famous dog with a beard, but they have breeds.
Don't they all have beards?
They have a body beard, don't they?
They do.
But yeah, Yorkshire Terrier is the breed of which lives from 14 to 16.
Wow. That's pretty long. I know that my own breed of dog, King Charles Spaniel, is a pretty short-lived one. But what she lacks in years, she more than makes up for in character and loveliness.
I thought you were going to say enthusiasm.
Well,
She's
yeah,
quite
that too.
Enthusiastic.
She certainly is.
But word of the day, if you want it, is equivocal.
Equivocal.
And the definition is subject to two or more interpretations and usually used to mislead or confuse.
Kind of a propaganda-ish kind of thing. Which reminds me, actually, while my daughter was watching the wonderful Love Island, I couldn't be in the room, so I went up to my room and I opened my computer and I watched a TV show that I heard people talking about, and it was Chernobyl, about the infamous accident, a nuclear power accident in 1980, whenever it was, 7, something like that. And I got to tell you, Tom, I think they're pretty much like an hour-long episode, but it's seriously intense viewing. And it's a 5-part series, and I watched 4 parts last night. Started at 9 o'clock, and I was done, I don't know, 1:30 in the morning, or 2 o'clock.
So you got the guy out of Mad Men in it. The English guy out of Mad Men. Or he plays an English character, I should say.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, most of the cast are English. One of them is Carol from The Walking Dead, though.
Jared Harris, his name is.
But it's absolutely incredible show, and it really makes you think. And there's all sorts to it. There's depths to it because, of course, the Russians when Chernobyl happened. I don't want to give any. I mean, obviously, it's very well documented, but I don't want to give anything away. But they tried to hush it, and so the local school children and stuff were told that it was nothing to worry about, that it was just a fire and nothing, no problem. So they had to go to school, and they were out playing in the playgrounds and stuff like this. And the Russians put a blanket ban around, so they stopped the phone lines, they stopped any kind of communication from the local area around Chernobyl to stop people from finding out about it, because they wanted to categorically deny that there'd been any problem. But unfortunately, the scale of a nuclear incident is so quite mind-bogglingly huge that they were unable to keep it stumm for very long. But it's quite an interesting program because you see how it happened, you see what was done to try and stop it, and the effects and the sort of the burns that people, the firemen and things that went there to put the initial blaze out. What actually happened is they had cellular damage, so basically their cells started sort of just decomposing. And initially they got blisters all over their body wherever they were, well, more so wherever they were more exposed to it. And then the blisters sort of start to get a little bit better, and then they start feeling a bit better, but the cellular damage is done, and it's your body starts to try and defend itself, and you seem to be initially getting better, and then it gets a lot worse, and you die within 3 days to 3 weeks in the most excruciating pain, as all of your body just disintegrates, all your organs leak, and it's just the most horrific death.
The Chernobyl disaster was a catastrophic nuclear accident that occurred on 26th of April 1986. At a nuclear reactor in a power plant near the north of Ukraine.
And I tell you what, the show really is definitely worth watching because it's very intense. But there's so much hypocrisy involved in it, and the KGB trying to cover it all up, and you've got to be seen to do the right thing. But there's also tremendous sacrifice, needless death, huge sort of layers of lies to pretend that it didn't. For example, I don't want to give anything away, but. There's also, you'll like this, the dilemma, the train, I don't know what they call it, the train track dilemma.
It's the trolley problem.
The trolley problem. So there's that, but on a massive scale. It's like, if you admit to what caused this problem, then you will be essentially become an enemy of the state, and you will probably be taken out and shot as a traitor. If you don't admit it, then you may be responsible potentially for the death of 50, 60 million people. And an area of land the size of, well, several European countries that is permanently uninhabitable for the next 24,000 years. So it's like,
It seems like, everyone's talking in hypotheticals or something.
Yeah.
It's like, I would never say that the government's doing anything like that.
Yeah.
I would never say that. And if they were doing that, then you'd have to get far away from here immediately.
Yeah. But it's like that. It's like, the trolley problem is like this. 5 people here or 1 person. Do you kill the 5 or the 4 or whatever it is? Or do you kill the 1 person and save the 4? Is one life worth killing in order to, all that? But in this instance, it's like, you're talking about millions and millions of people. And it isn't theoretical. It's if you don't go in there and do this job, and of course, most of the people who had to go and clear things up afterwards, and you're talking about, there was one stage where they had to get, it's just a series of problems that come from it. It's like the initial problems, you've got to put the fire out, but then putting the fire out doesn't actually cool things down, actually continues to heat up, because it's not fire that's hot, it's the isotopes or whatever, it's the uranium which is firing off and creating all this heat, which is what nuclear fusion does. It creates a lot of heat, which is why it produces electricity, produces steam, which is converted, all the rest of it. So once you put the fire out, that's the initial thing. So they put essentially borite or whatever it's called, and they essentially put kind of cement on the top of it, 5,000 tons of cement on top of it. And that eventually, after a few weeks, puts the fire out. But then, after that, the uranium is still incredibly hot. Thousands of degrees, and so it eventually melts all the sand in the concrete, which then becomes lava, and then the lava melts down through the core, eventually gets through the concrete underneath that's built on this big solid concrete platform, and then seeps into the water. Into the water table, and then poisons every river that feeds into.
Not well thought out then.
No, it's definitely worth watching, because you remember there was that massive tsunami a few years ago in Japan.
I don't, but go on.
Well, they had nuclear power station there, and the tsunami and earthquake damaged that nuclear power station. And essentially they had a similar thing happen to Chernobyl, where they had to rush in and people gave up their lives to try and shut it down before it went into meltdown.
2011 it was.
2011. So Chernobyl, I read this morning, was still operating as a nuclear power plant. There were 4 reactors there, and only one of them went, luckily. But it was almost inevitable that unless they could really quickly stop the first one and cool the first one down, it would eventually explode the other 3. So it would have been 4 times as big an issue as the actual. It was a terrible thing. But they had this a similar event happen in Japan, 2011, and again people had to go in, and they died in the most hideous way possible, to make sure that the general population was saved. And Japan immediately afterwards said, that's it, we're not having any more nuclear power stations, that's it, finished, we're not doing nuclear anymore. Immediately afterwards. And the Russians are still pumping out nuclear power, and the French still do it. And it just seems that it's all about risk reward, isn't it? And the reward is you get some power. And there are plenty of other ways of getting power, but this is one way of doing it. And the risk, and Murphy's Law, if something can happen, eventually it will happen. So, there are other nuclear power plants, and eventually there's going to be another incident, and probably another one after that, until they manage to get rid of it. And what happens with all the nuclear waste? This stuff's got like a half-life of 24,000 years and stuff.
There's still some, I forget where it is, I'm sure we can find out. But there's still some places that you can't even go because of that. Which, if it is that long, then it would be sensible that that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, all I'm saying is that show, I was so hooked by it that I watched 4 out of the 5 episodes in one sitting, because it's just so intense that you just, I couldn't go to sleep. There's no chance of my going to sleep. It was really, I'll just have to say, it's not an easy watch. It's pretty dark. But it really raises a lot of questions and makes you wonder, why we do certain things. Anyway, that's a recommendation that you should certainly watch it. In fact, I'd say it's a must view. And while we're talking about that, you recommended something to me recently, which was I Am Mother.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I watched it. It's quite a slow burn. Nothing, it's not got lots of action and stuff like that, but what it lacks in action, it more than makes up for in terms of poignancy, I think, in terms of, the message, the underlying message. And it's a bit like the film Moon, it's just quite quietly just gets on with it, but it's really deep and meaningful. And I thought it was a tremendous, it was a really clever way of looking at what AI does and how it thinks and how it's different from the way humans think. And I can't really give much away because it's got twists and stuff, so that if I really go into it in any detail, it's just giving away the plot. Which
I heard something once which said, "Oh, great! You can't say that about it's got a twist." Now I'm going to be sitting watching it and saying, "What's the twist going to be?" But we could say spoilers and keep talking about it if you want to, or you can just make a recommendation.
No, I'd make a recommendation. I would just only say that what I got from it, what made me think it's such a great film, immediately after the film, I thought, I want to see what reviews, what reviewers think of this. So I went in and I read a bunch of reviews, and quite a lot, fairly highbrow reviews, and none of the reviews that I read anyway, seemed to get the main message of the film, as far as I saw it. The main message of the film is, unfortunately, I can't say without it being a spoiler, really. But but by all accounts, from some of the reviews that I read, most people, if they watched the film, wouldn't get that anyway. So it's not really a spoiler if I tell you, because you may or may not get it. I don't know, but certainly I got it. And these are intelligent people. I'm not suggesting that they're not. They just didn't pick up on that, on the thing that I found to be the most interesting thing about it, which was really the way AI is so different from human intelligence. Afterwards, I was so geared up, and I thought, well, I'll watch another thing, and I was recommended Chappie, which is another AI computer, in this case, a robot. And he's a police robot, and the word "he" is important because he's a character with a personality, like a human, except that he's a robot, and he learns in the way that a human learns. And I didn't actually finish the film. I was tired by this point, and it didn't have the same resonance as the previous film, as I Am Mother. So I kind of gave up. I might watch the rest of it, but it's an easy sort of watch. It's a kind of entertaining watch rather than something that makes you think. But I Am Mother, I just loved the way that the computer, or that the robot thinks. It's just, and it goes down to it's very much that same problem, isn't it? The trolley problem. So it's funny that there's two. I mean, maybe the trolley problem is in lots of things, but there's two really good things that I've seen recently. Both have a version, not the usual version either, a completely different version of the trolley problem. One being a hypothetical in I Am Mother, but when you think about it, it may not be hypothetical. And the other one in Chernobyl being very real. If you don't do this, no one else can do it. If you don't do it, then millions and millions of people would die as a consequence. So what do you do? Anyway, enough of that. You saw another program. that I recommended to you, which is a very, very different program, completely bonkers.
I watched the first few episodes of Happy, yeah.
First few episodes.
It may even be more than a few, to be honest. I kind of binge watched it a little bit.
Yeah, it is definitely a binge watching kind of thing. I think they're only half an hour each or something, or 20 minutes each or something anyway. But it's definitely binge watching, isn't it? I mean, I don't think you get anything. There's no poignant message. There's no sort of, wow, I've got to sit down now and think about this. I'm not going to be able to sleep for 3 weeks thinking and pondering about that particular issue.
Well, there was one which I recommended you, which was Snowpiercer, which does have that in it. Which, if you haven't seen it yet, then I won't go into it. But
I will watch it. Yeah,
that is the type of thing which makes you think.
I love those kind of films. I really do. I mean, you've got to be in the right mood for it. Sometimes you just want to watch a comedy or just some kind of ridiculous, I don't know, action movie, which is just a pure entertainment.
What it reminded me of, Happy, was there's a guy in the film Sin City. I think his name's Marv, and this guy's like indestructible pretty much, and he's like the most hard, tough guy, and it just seems like he can just get injured and just carry on going.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it. I find it not to be. It's not realistic, obviously, because human beings are quite
fragile.
Yeah, but it's entertaining to watch because he can just go on. And
yeah, that's the thing about in Happy. He isn't a superhero in any way. He's just incredibly tough, and like you say, you're pretty much indestructible. And he gets shot and stabbed and all the rest of it, and then he just sort of carries on as if nothing ever happened.
Yeah, there was one bit which was frustrating. It was the first time he meets. This is pretty much where I'm up to, actually. And spoiler alert: the first time he meets the Santa who kidnapped his daughter, he gets his arse handed to him.
He does,
and it's not the first time he loses a fight necessarily, but it's pretty close to it, and it's not even, it wasn't even close. That's, as a person who's invested in the main character, automatically that's frustrating because you think, right, he's about to kind of win,
kind of whoop ass. Yeah, you're right. Do you know what happened to me? The film Limitless. The film Limitless is another one that's just brilliant because he takes this drug, this pill, and it kind of fires all of the neurons, and he has full access to all the memories and everything, all the kind of information that his brain stored but not thought was very important, and it's just kind of lost into the depths of his memory. And it also makes him fully alert at any one given time, so he's listening and able to listen to sort of everything and take everything that your ears hear. We filter it out, so I'm focusing on this conversation, so I'm not paying attention to the air conditioning over there and so on and so forth, but he would be fully aware. Yeah, but now you are. It's like, try not to scratch if you're itchy, that kind of thing. But I am really itchy now suddenly. The thing is...
This is conversational hypnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. He's fully aware of everything, and it just gives him this sort of incredible ability to just, I guess, just understand everything that's in the past, everything that's going on, and really accurately be able to predict stuff in the future. And so he goes into buying stocks and shares. And in the movie, I didn't get it at the time, but of course he goes in and starts buying. He becomes a millionaire overnight because he just knows all the right things to buy and the right things to sell and so on and so forth. But of course that puts him on the radar and he gets picked up. But if he was that bright, he would have also foreseen the fact that his action would be picked up by people, and so he's able to manipulate all the people around him, and eventually becomes he becomes I'm not going to say what he becomes in case you haven't seen the film. It's very worth watching. The thing is, they went on and they made a TV series after that. Do you remember?
I've seen it, yeah. That's on Netflix as well.
Yeah. Well, what did you think of the TV series?
I liked it. But you just alluded to something which is frustrating to watch sometimes, in the sense that when you watch things and there's inconsistencies in TV shows or films or whatever, and it might be similar to what we were just talking about, which is like strength or something.
Yeah.
So there's
in this case, it's intelligence. I'm thinking of
but it's everywhere in all sorts of shows and that sort of, and it's frustrating to watch as a viewer. So like if there's a person who can lift a car one moment and then the next moment, I should have
there needs to be a good reason. Like Popeye, the cartoon character, he wouldn't be able to lift a car, but if he had a can of spinach, then suddenly he would be able to. So you go, okay, he hasn't always got the ability to do this. Or, the Incredible Hulk, when he's the Incredible Hulk, he can he's this incredible strength. But you don't always possess that. But in these instances, that's not the case, is it? In the case of Happy, he is just solidly strong and tough. And yet, you're right. He gets his ass handed to him, which is an inconsistency. And I found that with the TV show of Limitless. I found it to be non-limitless because, in fact, the guy who has this ability to be able to just be on a different level of understanding, suddenly he doesn't notice certain things, and he's getting other people to help him. It just kind of, and then that's when I stopped watching it. So I didn't watch it all the way through because I just found that frustrating. It's like either he has got this limitless amount of intelligence that puts him in, he's the most aware person in any given room, and he's anticipating in advance who's going to be in the room and what kind of clothes they're going to wear and stuff because he just knows, because he's so attuned to the way that he'd be able to look at you and Darren Brown you and just know what kind of past you've got, what your what kind of job you do, and all this kind of thing, because he's just so attuned. Like Darren Brown is, I don't know how he does that, but he's so attuned to certain signals, and he kind of, I guess he makes a lot of guesses, and then based on what he says, he maybe refines the guess until he's astonishing you by basically describing your entire life.
The funny thing is about that particular example, I agree with everything you said, but I heard something recently, which is, have you ever seen the trick where they do the kind of what is your card type thing?
Sure.
And they...
Well, there's loads of tricks like that.
Put a knife in to a basketball, and then they get out the card, and it's your card.
Yeah.
And I not that I particularly care that much about how magicians do their tricks or whatever, but I learned how that was done just in a conversation, and essentially it is as simple as you, prior to doing anything, you go get a basketball and you put a card inside the basketball, and then when you go and do your tricks, you specifically go to a basketball court, and when you're doing that trick, you specifically make sure they get that particular card, and then you make it look as though the basketball is random, and then you do the whole trick.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it would seem at the time
it ruined it
as though it is ruining it, though. That's the point. So it would seem as though someone's psychic and they have this major ability, but it's much more likely that they just had forethought to. Oh, yeah,
there's a tremendous amount of Darren Brown. There's a documentary about him actually, and he started doing magic tricks in a restaurant in Bristol, and he said he'd go from table to table, and off, if they didn't want it, they're feeling romantic and they're in the middle of a conversation or whatever, he'd just leave them be. But if they wanted a trick, he'd say, "Would you like a magic trick?" And they go, "Yeah, sure." And he said the problem was that it's very easy to trick the person who's sitting right in front of you, but if anyone was watching from another table, they'd spot it straight away, because there's you have to bless you. You have to lead the mind in a certain direction, and that's where the real skill is. But in going back to Limitless and the TV show, I found it exactly as you say, really frustrating that he has got this limitless amount of intelligence, and yet at the same time, he, he doesn't notice certain things.
Makes bad decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's inconsistent.
It's like that example that you used about, well, of course he's going to get noticed by someone. Unless
that's part of the plan.
With that particular example, I thought, he's made 7 figures now. How? And he only started off with, I think it was like a couple of thousand or something like that. Or he borrowed a few thousand from a loan shark or something.
Oh, that's
how
right,
quick would it be to turn that 7 figures into, say, 8 figures, and then it would be exponential from there.
Yeah.
But yet he wants to leverage some other guy's money, who then he gets into all these problems with.
Yeah, it's true.
It just doesn't seem that super intelligent to know that those things were going to happen. But at the end of the day, it's fiction.
It is. And also, it's unlikely that you would ever have that level. I mean, the only thing that's likely to get that level of intelligence would be an AI. Because it would have exponential growth in terms of intelligence, potentially.
Well, there are some conversations going on around that, how it's not going to be necessarily all one or the other, but we're going to sort of like merge ourselves with AI in the sense that...
Yeah, it makes sense.
It will be part of us in the future.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
I see that happening, yeah. So you've got... I don't know, implants, or maybe not even implants. Maybe they're not even required at that level.
Difficult to know how it will look, because people would never have predicted what, we'd all be walking around with limitless information in our pocket and cameras. And
well, yeah, that brings me back to it, because the limitless he's still limited, whereas an AI potentially wouldn't be, because it would be linked to all the other computers in the world and would have the ability at some point to exponentially increase, if it put its mind to it, it could increase the architecture of its own intelligence. Whereas in the movie, he's still limited by the constraints of the human brain, which is just one brain, unless he was able to become telepathic and then get in some kind of telekinesis and body swap and basically take over everybody's collective intelligence. Or plug into the internet somehow and develop some kind of way of maximising his intelligence that way. Without these kind of things, he's still constrained by the limits of his hearing, by the limits of his eyesight, and by the limits of his brain side, which is not the case with artificial intelligence at all.
What did you think of the video I sent you on the Iron Man?
Brilliant. Loved it. Yeah.
So for those, obviously no one would know, but there's recently a video that I'll put in the description or whatever, where they've figured out how to. It's basically a jetpack suit, isn't it? And then they got the specs from Marvel around how to create the Iron Man suit, which I thought was interesting, because it's not as though that's
scientifically based.
Yeah.
It's like a comic book.
Yeah, it just looks good. But yeah, it's literally the case that there is an Iron Man suit now.
That's just so cool. So cool. Would be cool to have that suit. Would you put it to good use?
But when he was trying to walk, I was like, that does not look practical.
No. No, it definitely wasn't the most practical suit in the world. But, it's, graphene. Well, we've talked about graphene in the past, and there are some problems with graphene in terms of the expense of creating it, and so it's only available in really, really small amounts at the moment. But graphene is an extraordinary thing, because it's 1 atom thick, and if you stretched it out to about 2 meters, 2 meters square, a cat could sleep on it. It's just 1 atom thick. It would be strong enough for a cat to sleep on. And yet, so thin, it would be invisible to the human eye. So it would look like the cat was hovering in midair. And graphene is the most conductive compound or element or whatever it is known to humanity, and all sorts of other things. It's it's an extraordinary thing. And if you were to make a bulletproof vest out of it, it would be. I mean, it would require a lot, and it would cost a fortune at this point in our development. But it would be so thin, you'd be able to. At an atom thick or a couple of atoms thick, you could barely see it. It'd be the thinnest thing. You could put it on. It'd be very easy to maneuver because it's so thin, and yet it would stop a bullet. It would stop a bullet, a much higher caliber bullet, at a much closer range than the best bulletproof vest that's currently available on the market. So it's a super. It's one of these things that I think we're going to see a lot more of. But at the moment, it's extremely expensive to manufacture, and therefore there's very small quantities of it. But I think that's one thing to look out for. And I think in the future, any kind of suit that was going to be like Iron Man, that you was going to have that level of strength and that level of flexibility and everything else that you require to really. Not like this guy who's genuinely got an Iron Man suit, but it's like you say, a bit clunky. That would be like a Superman's suit. You could put it on underneath your clothes, and it would just give you superhuman strength. Because you'd be practically indestructible, or would you? I mean, the fact that it could stop a bullet, you're still going to have the, it absorbs. It doesn't really absorb all the energy from the bullet, so that it doesn't give you a bruise or anything. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. But it's pretty fascinating stuff anyway.
I'm pretty sure, I mean, I know it's not a direct comparison, but the actual bulletproof vests, it does hurt when you get shot, even though you don't, it theoretically stops it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I sent you a little while ago was about cotton and the cotton industry. And it comes from a documentary which basically highlights the fact that in terms of the... I can't remember the specific claim, but the fashion industry is one of the worst things for the environment.
That's right, yeah.
And
there's the sheer quantity of water that's used in order to create a shirt or something like that.
Yeah, any type of clothing. But for me, I was asking the next question for that, because when people talk about the water that's used, I'm like, well, why is that a bad thing? Like, do we not have... I know it's not limitless, but as far as I'm aware, we don't have a shortage of water on
a global scale. Although there are places that have.
There are shortages, yeah. But for us, we can't get them that water. So for us, is it a bad thing that we're using a load of water? And I think I did tell you this. But there's a sea in, I think it was either Kazakhstan or Indonesia, one of the two. I think it was Indonesia. And the sea was the size of the country Ireland.
Oh, you're probably talking about the Aral Sea in Kazakhstan.
Might be Kazakhstan.
Yeah, I studied that in geography because I did a geography degree, and that was one of the things we studied.
And now it's gone. And the reason it's gone is to produce clothes for the Western world, so that we can have cheaper clothes that we don't necessarily need, because the fashion industry has produced this demand. Instead of it being like one or two, per year or whatever it might be, the trends of fashion, they're getting them out every, I think it's every few weeks or something. This is no longer in fashion, now this is in fashion. And it's extremely, like the example I gave was that it's tons of water to create an outfit for one person, and they've got rid of a whole sea the size of a country.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And the reason why it's worth mentioning in this documentary is not because, that's a bit of a crime from the point of view of that you had something beautiful in the world that is no longer there, but it's because of the impact on the people. Because the world itself, or planet Earth rather, will be fine with or without us.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about Save the Planet and global warming and all the rest of it. The global warming is a natural process. It's been going on since the dawn of time. We've had ice ages. We've had sort of, I don't know what they call it, warm times, where the global warming it's just a natural balance. It's a bit like a rhythm, but of the seasons, but just on a massive thousands of years scale. But what apparently is very evident is that, well, there are people who deny it. Some very famous people as well. Mr. Trump, looking at you.
Well, I think the problem with it is there's just the slight subtleties that have a huge impact. So if it's titled a particular thing like global warming, and you think your perception of that is that it's going to be really hot,
that's right,
then obviously it is going to seem a little bit far-fetched if someone's saying global warming all the time.
Also, if you come from a cold place like the UK...
Well, he's from New York, isn't he, the person you're referring to?
Well, yeah,
and
he is.
If like polar ice caps, for example, are raised by 2 degrees, they melt.
That's
and
right.
Therefore, that has an impact on sea levels, and those
even
sea
1
levels,
degree, 1 degree it melts. Because
if it's 0
at
degrees.
some point it must, there be a point where water freezes at 0, and therefore if it's currently -1 or it's at 0, then it freezes, and if it's 1 degree, then it melts. It won't melt immediately because it will retain some of its. The body of ice has a natural cooling effect, just as you would put ice in a glass of Coca-Cola or something, or water to cool it down. So, but over time it will melt because it's warming the edge of the ice up. Yeah, I think you're right. The thing is that people don't talk about is that the catastrophe of global warming isn't really a problem for the Earth at all. And it's not save the Earth, it's save humanity. Because we're very, very reliant on technology, and that technology includes production and supply of essential goods and foods, grain, rice, water. All of these things are affected by global warming. And so it's our culture. And if you look at human civilizations in the past, they all have a timeline, and eventually they destroy themselves. Or they get destroyed by another civilization. And that's historically what's always happened. And that comes back to that movie that you recommended for me, I Am Mother, which sort of comes full circle on that particular idea, in my view. But it's an interesting thing. My oldest daughter, Rebecca, who I talked about, on one side she wants to watch Love Island, and at the same time she's really, really keen on saving the environment and looking after the earth, which is a great thing. And I really think that the millennials and the post-millennials, or whatever they're called, Generation Z, are much more in tune with the environment. More like you, because you're a vegan, and that's not because you don't like meat. It's because you don't like the concept of killing, isn't it? It's the inhumanity of the farming industry, I think, that does it for you. Is that right?
Well, it's a philosophical position. So to summarise it, we've got an episode on it, but to summarise it, it's veganism causes the least amount of unnecessary suffering. But the other example I was going to give to you in this documentary, which is more, I think, will be more obvious about whether it's right or wrong, rather than a sea disappearing. I just thought that was a major thing to talk about.
Incredible.
Was I've, as you know, I've done some education on libertarianism, and in libertarianism they question the concept of whether a government should be needed or not. And one of the examples that's often given to them is if there was a company or some sort of business or something who was polluting the water supply, what would you do without government? And some of the examples given are like, with phones and stuff, you can take pictures and then there can be a boycott. But in this instance, these big companies, like, I don't want to single anyone out specifically because they're all big corporates, but anyone who's making large-scale fashion, hire companies in, and this is, I'm pretty sure it's Indonesia, factories in Indonesia to produce their clothes.
Yeah.
And it's based on price. So, and these companies are able to keep their costs down by getting rid of the the metals that are needed to produce the clothes, like lead. There are like 4 of them, and they all have neurological diseases for people who consume the water in that area,
right?
Who dump them in the local water supply, and everyone knows about it. And we pay these companies for clothes that we don't need, so that these companies in Indonesia can produce clothes that they then literally dump poison into the water supply. I just thought that's amazing that exists and it's not stopped.
Yeah.
I was just dumbfounded by it.
It's unfortunate, but it's true. I think it's human nature, isn't it? You're more concerned about a spot on your nose than you are about an earthquake in China that kills 5,000 people.
It's a psychology issue.
And it's a question of not in my back garden. It's all right in someone else's back garden.
Yeah.
You know. So this is unfortunately the way we're going. And in terms of pollution and things like this, and right or wrong, well, we could talk about the merits of capitalism or not. At the moment, capitalism seems to be the best system that we've got. People say, well, communism was rubbish, it's been tested. It hasn't ever been tested, in my view. Communism cannot be tested, in my view, while there are inequalities, while there's inefficiencies. I think communism is a concept where everything is shared equally, and that includes decision making and all the rest of it. And in no society have we ever seen that.
It's tough though, because you use the word shared there. How do you enforce sharing? That's
the point. You don't enforce it. And this is the point about it, is that in order for communism to really work, it would need to be a truly equal society. And I just don't see...
Well, everyone would have to do it voluntarily, right?
Yeah, but if we remove money, I think money eventually will go anyway. I mean, it will go because technology will probably surpass it. I mean, we talked about it before, where we're talking about universal basic income, UBI. So in universal basic income, I hear eminent politicians on the TV talking about how you can't fund it, and this and that, and the number of jobs, and they're just not listening to what's coming. They're not paying attention to what's coming over the horizon, which is, and it's been going on. If you look back, even Trump, he says, let's build a wall to stop the South Americans, Mexicans and so on coming into America. And we're all losing our jobs to China and America and blah, blah, blah. It's just not true. The Chinese currently are massively employed, but they'll all lose their jobs. But they won't lose their jobs to people in Zimbabwe. They'll lose their jobs to AI, to computers. There'll be technology will take their jobs. And technology has been taking people's jobs for decades. And technology is only really just starting to take off. But it's exponential. The growth of it now, I think, from this point onwards, is going to be near exponential. And then it will be exponential. And so we're going to end up at a time where, there's no need for people to go out and work because it's inefficient, because there's a more efficient way of doing it, and it's a better way of doing it. And then if there's no need to do a job, I mean, that's the basis of capitalism, is that capitalism requires... it's an exchange of labour for capital, for So you've got the working class who exchange their labour for pay, and then you've got the capitalists who make the profit out of it. And nobody disputes that, and it's had lots of very, very positive effects. I mean, countless, tremendously positive effects. But it's also had lots of negative effects as well. But so has every other system that's ever been tried. There isn't a perfect system out there. It never has been. But I think eventually, what happens when this money-based system can't survive anymore? The economy can't There's no requirement. This is the big problem that's coming up over the horizon. I see these things all the time that, people, when they retire, they're not going to have enough money to live on. Well, no one's going to have enough money because there's no requirement for you to do a job anymore. So why is someone going to pay you money to do a job that can be done more efficiently and much cheaper by a computer? It just doesn't make sense. So how are you going to get your money? Eventually I can't see money surviving because there's no requirement for it anymore. But in order for it not to require, there needs to be a certain level of equality. And that equality can also come from technology. I mean, talking about graphene again, one of the other things that graphene can do is it can filter seawater into drinking water. Just one atom of it. If it was made into a filter over a bottle top or something, it can filter seawater directly into drinking water.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so there's incredible technological advances going on, and it's not just that. It's biotechnology. It's all sorts of stuff all across the board, and this is the exponential growth. And I think what's actually going to happen is that it's going to radically change human society, but it's going to do it in a fairer way, because when you're no longer cold because there's much more energy efficient heating or cooling, because you never get hot in the summer because air conditioning is much more effective, and then eventually, but no one's working. Well, hardly any people are working because there's no requirement for them to work. Where's the money going to come from? And what are you going to need to spend all your money on anyway?
Not all about need. I do see where you're going.
A desire.
And when you think about what things we really do need, like as you say, water. If you had like a bot or something that never needed a break and just could go on forever, creating water, then there'd be enough free
water for everybody, and it would be free.
And food would be the same. So in the I Am Mother thing, you could literally see food or crops being created.
That's right.
But for people, the people that spend ridiculous amounts of money on food on one evening, and there's really no need for them to do that.
No, that's right.
Like champagne that costs thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of find that quite disgusting. There was a TV show advertised recently on Channel 4. I sometimes watch C4OD, Channel 4 On Demand. And they have adverts. That's the way they fund it. So you have to sit there and watch. You can fast forward through the show that you want to watch, but you can't fast forward through the adverts. Anyway, so one of the things was this thing, and you got the ability to. It's a bit like all advertising now. It's much more developed than it was. So you go, are you interested in this? Would you like to add this to your list of things that you'd want to watch? So they're advertising sometimes TV shows as well. I think they do it on BBC iPlayer too. I'm not sure. But anyway, you can say, add to my list, or I'm not interested. So you're programming it to figure out what your tastes are. So I've only seen it the once because I went, oh, no, I'm not interested. But it was, or I've probably seen it a couple of times because the first time I probably just ignored it. And then I was like, I don't want to see this anymore. But it was about a program with the most expensive things. So the most expensive bottle of wine, the most expensive car, the most expensive meal, the most expensive chocolate bar, whatever it might be. I mean, and it was just staggering and disgusting amounts of money that people are spending for no reason. Like this guy showering in gold. He's actually got little bits of gold that come out in the water to shower in because it's better. And he puts gold in his food because it tastes better, apparently. You know, it doesn't taste better. He perceives it to taste better because he's...
I'd be concerned about someone's health who would be...
If you ate enough gold, yeah. But the problem with it is that it's just so disgusting when there are people who are starving to death. But, you know, how could you justify spending £50,000 on a meal?
If you had 50 million or 500 million or something.
But if I had 500 million, I wouldn't spend £50,000 on a meal because it's just it's obscene.
I do understand what you mean, but then when we come back to Peter Singer's Shallow Pond example, you can. It's Do you remember what it is? Or I'll go through it quickly.
Yeah,
it's just
I do. I do recall it.
If you're on your way to work and you've got your nice new shoes and your nice new trousers or whatever, and there's a child who's drowning in a very shallow pond, and you can go and save them, but you have to recognise that your new shoes and your new trousers are going to get ruined or whatever. And most people would say, well, of course, I'm going to go and save the child. But when you buy those new shoes and the new trousers, what you're doing is, instead of donating that money to charity where you could save a child in the third world, you're choosing the shoes.
Yeah.
And so we all have that. Well, not all of us, because some people genuinely do donate large amounts of charity and they sacrifice what some people don't do. But we all have that, moral
It's true.
question.
I like to go to a nice restaurant, and I'll pay more money to go to a nice restaurant if I can afford it. But there is a limit. See, for me at least, I know that if something costs too much money, I simply won't enjoy it, because it comes with a layer of guilt attached to it. If it's perceived values, if I'm unaware of these things, but say someone goes, oh, I win the lottery and I got loads of money, and there's a restaurant and a meal costs £20,000. I know I would not enjoy. A lot of people they'd enjoy that ever so much more because it's so opulent, and
Yeah.
But I wouldn't. I know how I am, because I've had things like that happen on a much more smaller micro scale, and I've still felt that's just, I can't enjoy that.
I know what you mean.
It's not right.
I do agree with you as well. Some people might say, though, that the rich guy who's showering in gold could easily do far more for charity or charitable causes than we could do very easily.
Maybe he does.
Maybe he does, yeah. And so whilst we're being critical, he's probably saved more lives, even if it's from an egotistical point of view. Some sort of charity do where he's showing off how much money he has, probably does more for charity than 10 people could do, 10 normal people.
Possibly, yeah.
So who are we to criticise?
Yeah, but then again, if he's making, clothing,
if he makes his money from the fashion
or pretty much anything, if we're honest, if he's manufacturing anything, he's probably only atoning very slightly for the problems that he's creating.
Yeah.
In reality, if you're actually going to get some kind of forensic accountant to come along and analyse all the pros and cons of what he does, probably find that he probably is a net contributor to problems rather than the other way around, even if he does contribute a lot to maybe not all, certainly not in all cases, but it is a very finely balanced thing, this world that we live in, and the thing is that you and I, Tom, we don't have all the answers, which I wish we did, but we don't even have the beginning of a clue about the questions, never mind the answers. So,
well, the documentary that I was referring to is from someone called Stacey Dooley, and the program's called Stacey Dooley Investigates, and that particular one is called Are Your Clothes Wrecking the Planet? And I would recommend that people watch that, just because if it stops people buying unnecessary clothing, that might be a good thing.
So Stacey Dooley is she's fantastic. I've been watching documentaries that she's done for years. In fact, she's done a load of documentaries. She went. I think she lives in Brighton, or at least until recently she lived in Brighton anyway, which is close to where we're based. But she's from Essex originally, I think. And she got like a strong Essex sort of accent, but she couldn't be further from the conceived idea of an Essex
stereotype.
Girl. The stereotype. She's a really deep thinker, and she went travelling around the world. So she go to the Maldives, for example, or she'll go to East Africa, where people spend thousands of pounds to go on these safaris, and then instead of going on the safari, she'll go behind the scenes and she'll interview local people and find out about the problems, the negative impact of that, because you always hear about the positive impact. And so she'll say, well, everything has a balance, right? So what's the negative, and how does it affect the people, and is it positive to the people or is it negative? And so she'll really investigate these kind of things. So she's been doing that kind of thing for a long time, and raising awareness of issues that perhaps people aren't really familiar with, and they're not really thinking about. So, for example, did you know that one of the islands in the Maldives is just completely covered in rubbish from all the tourism?
I've heard about the there's something like there's a proper name for it, but there's a certain distance within the sea somewhere. There's something I'll put it in the description about what it's actually called, but it's something like Rubbish Island or something, and it's in the sea where people have been dumping in the sea, and it's just
created a big island,
a few miles of our rubbish.
Well, in this instance, she goes to an island which is, you see paradise when you see all of the tourist information about the Maldives. You never see any of the problems. And they're very, very small, flat islands. And most of the people live on one of the islands, which is basically just a city. And everything else looks like paradise, except that it doesn't, because you've got people living behind the scenes on these islands, and they live in abject poverty, most of them. And one of the islands literally is completely and totally submerged in all of the rubbish that's been created by this exclusive tourism. They just go there and they dump it on the island. Now there is no island, there's just a big rubbish dump, because there's nowhere else, there's no landfill. They're such a small country and small islands, there's nowhere to put the rubbish otherwise. So, this is a stinking, disease-infested, rat-infested island, which is just horrible, really.
And there's one called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and
doesn't sound great to me.
1.15 to 2.41 million metric tons of plastic entering the ocean each year.
Wow. Well, that's another thing, plastic, right? Technology is finding alternatives. Plastic hasn't been around for that long, and it was an incredible thing. It's had a huge and very positive impact on many people's lives. It's revolutionised so many things, the plastic industry, and yet it's also become increasingly apparent that it's got very negative side effects.
The volume of it, isn't it?
And the fact that it's a bit like this nuclear power. It's like if it goes wrong, and it does go wrong. It's got a ridiculous half-life. Plastic is the same in that it takes a long time to disintegrate and to disappear back into. It does eventually. In 10,000 years' time, there'll be, if we stop using plastic today, there'll probably be no evidence of ever having been plastic. But it takes a long time, and it's got really horrible, negative, detrimental impact on animal life and fauna, so which is animal life, I suppose. But anyway, but we're overcoming it. People are becoming aware of it. There is a movement, and a lot of people would say that the movement is coming too slow, and not fast enough. It's not happening quickly enough. And then you've got other people who probably, and not saying that this is the case, but I imagine people like Trump have a vested interest in denying. Well, I don't imagine it's clear that people like Trump have a vested interest in denying that global warming exists, because of all sorts of things that are pulling him in one direction or another. But does he really believe that?
I saw something on a site that was about solar jobs. It's something like in the last year, the amount of jobs which have been lost in the solar industry is something like 24,000 as a result of things which has been put into practice by Trump. It's sort of like of the things that of the direction we need to go in is kind of reversed somehow in that instance. But I was just about to use solar as an example of I don't see the downsides of that.
There are downsides of it.
Like?
Well, the material that the panels are made out of, which is apparently there are downsides to everything.
There must be some positive ways that we can.
It's definitely way better for the environment than fossil fuels and nuclear, but I mean, I remember a time when they were going on about nuclear being a green fuel, you know?
But the reason why that's important is because what I was about to say was it's almost like it wasn't thought out before we started it. So, like, for example, plastic. Let's start using plastic. And then it's sort of like no one said, well, if we start using plastic for the whole world, what's that going to do? So we could say the same thing about solar. So if 7 billion people start using solar, what will that do? And if you're saying it's damaging to...
I'd say it's currently damaging. And I think the solar, I don't know a great deal about it, but I believe that solar panels and things are becoming ever more efficient and less of whatever material it is, which is I mean, if you can Google it probably, but the panels are made out of something which needs to be manufactured and put in place, and so that's mined or whatever it is. I don't know, but I'm sure it's possible to replace it. In fact, I've heard that again, graphene is bandied around as this miracle material, but graphene is something that could replace it and make it a lot more efficient. But again, it's currently very expensive to produce graphene, and so I think personally we'd be much better off using things like solar panels and wind farms and wave power and all that kind of stuff, because they are in some ways going to damage the environment, but way less than any of the other ways that we've currently got of producing power. And so it's much better to damage the environment a little bit less. Farming damages the environment, but there are different ways of farming. You know, whatever type of farming you do damages the environment. It ruins the soil, it messes up with the ecosystem, and so on and so forth. I mean, one of the solutions to fuel for cars that was bandied around, a couple of decades ago, before feasible battery power, and batteries also, to produce a battery currently is detrimental to the environment too. So even creating batteries is not very healthy, but it's better than
pollution.
Yeah, it's better than using up fossil fuels and stuff, which it's just better. So it's not perfect. It's zero polluting once it's in the car, perhaps, but it's not zero polluting to produce it in the first place.
Yeah, that's
as
well, isn't it?
Bandied about, as I was saying a couple of decades ago when I was studying geography, was this in Brazil, where they use ethanol to power their cars instead of petrol. They produce sugar cane, and the sugar cane is converted into ethanol, and their cars, vast majority of the cars in Brazil are driven on alcohol, which is much better for the environment. But in order to do that, you need to wipe out vast amounts of the Amazon rainforest in order to produce the sugar cane that's required to. And so, it's a balance. It's like you make an improvement on one side, but the downside affects something else. And I think we've always been particularly bad at that. When you look at the Americans deciding about prohibition, it's like, alcohol is bad for you, let's make alcohol illegal. Well, that sounds like a great idea, right? Let's make, well, not to anyone who enjoys a bit of a tipple, but, that's a small price to pay. We'll make it illegal in the land of the free. We'll make alcohol illegal. And suddenly this just feeds into the mafia, which becomes ever more powerful. And then alcohol prohibition after 10 years seems like clearly an obvious failure in retrospect. And yet at the time they're like, well, okay, well, we tried it. Now we go back because it's created all these, this organised crime problem now. And so the organised crime goes, well, we can't sell alcohol anymore, so what do we do now? Well, drugs. So then the drugs problem comes about because you've created an organisation which is now trying to adapt for its very survival, which is it's moved away from alcohol, so it goes on to drugs. And the drugs prohibition that we've seen in the Western world for decades has been incredibly detrimental and killed many, many millions of people have died as a direct result of it.
Yeah, no, I did watch a Louis Theroux documentary on the impact of drugs. And, it's just in some instances it's taken some sort of towns and cities far more than others, to the point where it's like 1 in 3 people have been addicted to a particular opioid of some sort.
No, in Portugal, 10 years, 20 years ago.
We were going to have a chat about this, weren't we?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if we've got time now, though.
No, probably not.
Maybe we could actually do a proper discussion on it. I have a feeling we're just going to agree the whole time, which is fine with me. But it might be worth doing some investigation on, I don't know, what are the facts around it, and then how does that compare to what we're currently doing, for example?
That's a good point. So anyway, just to say then quickly that in Portugal they legalised all drugs, and the drug abuse level has fallen through the floor.
There's also the benefits are around stuff like HIV and
all sorts of benefits to it. But it's very logical. It makes complete sense. And when you use prohibition in America as a good example, and all the problems that came about from that, it's just so bizarre. And people we trust, so-called people we trust in power, who, for one reason or another, mostly to do with votes and maintaining their power, won't change the drug laws and all the rest of it, even in the face of quite overwhelming evidence that it's detrimental. And yet, anyway, nevertheless, that's like you say, it's a topic for another day. But I think there are so many things that we could talk about with regard to that. I mean, not just drugs and the implications of that, but also the reason why certain policies like that come into effect in the first place, and why they're maintained against all common sense.
I think with some people it is the case that it's not evidence-based. It's just sort of like, why would we make drugs legal for a society when they're so detrimental? And it's not based on the outcomes. It's based on, I don't want to be seen to be responsible for people saying it's okay to take drugs or something, because, well, look what happens when people take drugs.
Yeah.
But it's just based on the outcome, isn't it? You have to look at the evidence and say, well, it's
well,
better
I
to
mean,
be
taking drugs is clearly a bad thing to do, but at the same time, just by saying that doesn't stop people from taking drugs. And wanting to experiment is actually in my view, it's part of what makes us human. If the first humans never bothered coming down from the tree and walking across the savannah and all the rest of it, or the first proto-humans or whatever they were, if they didn't actually make decisions and change things and do, experiment and test things out, then we'd still be living up a tree, eating fruit and fighting over branches, and so, but I mean, they do say curiosity killed the cat, but no species, in my view, is more curious than the human species. And look where it's got us. I mean, we've almost entirely destroyed the planet. I mean, that's no small feat in its own.
You have to laugh, otherwise you'd cry.
Yeah, you can laugh to the point that you cry, I suppose. But so anyway, lots of things to talk about, lots of things we've talked about, interesting discussions.
Well, if anyone is feeling charitable, in the shallow pond example, if you'd rather not buy shoes and donate, then it's Peter Singer created a charity called The Life You Can Save, and that's at thelifeyoucansave.org, and he's basically done some research around what are the charities which don't sort of waste the money or take the money and spend it on advertising or something like that. So these charities are vetted from the point of view of a large percentage of the donation goes towards the actual cause.
So if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem then?
I don't know, I think we might all be a part of the problem.
I think we are.
At least in the...
But we could also be part of the solution.
I agree, yeah.
I think things as well, with my kids' generation, your kids' generation, I think there's much more awareness generally the general level of awareness of these issues and these problems, and also just the way that capitalism has been going. I mean, a car manufacturer has to consistently produce more and more cars and create a need in us, because all salesmen, you can't sell anything to anyone unless they want it. So you've got to create a desire within people for the new shirt, for the new outfit, for the new car, for the new whatever you're producing. Otherwise, no one will buy it anymore. So you've got to. I mean, I've got a car, 12 years old now. It's been a pretty good car, and it's fairly reliable. I haven't had that many problems with it. It runs well. If I were to sell it, I would have to spend a lot more money on a comparable car. So financially, it's not worth me selling it. I might as well just run it into the ground. But car companies would find that just a very distressful thing to hear. There's a guy here who could probably afford a new car on hire purchase or something. Not that I can, really. I'd rather not. But that's besides the point. I am a good example of someone who they would be looking to sell a new car to, because they have to sell new cars. In order to keep the workforce producing more cars, they need to be selling more cars. And because they're usually public limited companies with shares and shareholders, they need to be making a profit, which means they need to sell new cars. So it's a machine that's just, there's no end to it. They have to constantly producing new cars, otherwise their business model dies. But we don't need new cars. When I was a kid, I used to be able to cycle around all the time. There weren't that many cars. I wouldn't want my kids cycling around now. There's so many cars, it's just downright dangerous. But I think technology will solve that problem too. Now, we've talked about it before. Artificial intelligence learns exponentially. So as you've got one car driving along using artificial intelligence, it makes a problem. It has the ability that all other cars learn from that problem. I'm not saying they currently do, but they probably will very shortly if they don't. At the moment, they're just being tested. But so your artificial intelligence car drives along, self-driving car, has an accident. Then all the other cars learn by it, and that accident doesn't happen anymore. And so a car in India doesn't notice a cow lying in the middle of the road because it's black and it's in the middle of the night and doesn't see it. Well, then all the other cars in the world, regardless of where they are, that are artificially intelligent and linked into that same AI system, are going to learn by that mistake and go, okay, there could be a black cow lying in the middle of the dark road. And they've learned by it. Whereas a human, you can only learn by yourself. And one of the benefits of humanity, and I think one of the reasons why we're in this position in the first place, is because you and I can talk to each other and share ideas and share experience. So I can say, if you're driving in India, sometimes there are cows in the middle of the road. And some of them might be black, and at night you might not see them and you might crash into them. Same could happen in Wales or somewhere, in fact. Anywhere rural, there might be a bit of livestock, and a sheep might be white and easy to see in the dark, but a big dark brown bull or a black bull or something happens to be a bit tired and thought it'd have a kip in this nice warm road. You never know. So the thing is, I could tell you that and you might bear that in mind, and then you might forget about it, or it might never be important to you. But someone else who I've never told that to may drive along one night in a dark country road and crash into a black bull or cow lying in the middle of the road.
No, I would say what's worse is people just going on different countries or whatever and driving the wrong side of the road.
Likewise,
these types of easy things that a computer wouldn't ever do if it was programmed the right way. That is.
So the computers, they will become safer. I think at one point, the inevitability is that people will drive less and they'll require a car less, because if the car can drive by itself, you don't have to bother with parking. So you say, I need to go into the cinema, or, well, you won't go to the cinema. You might go to a restaurant, maybe. So I'll go to the restaurant and we'll go there and the car will drive. And then I might be able to have a few drinks because I don't have to drive anymore. So I'll definitely have the car drive and drop me off there, and then it doesn't have to go and park because that's inefficient. So the car could go home. But then why would it go home when it could be being used as a taxi and driving loads of other people around. So I think the future of cars is carpooling, where they will either be recharging themselves, or they may be able to in the future recharge while they're on the go. But there'll be no requirement. 90% of the time, I've got a car, it's just parked outside now. I only use it to drive to work and back and drop my kids off at school. Most of the time it sits there doing nothing. So 90% of the cars, I think we'll still see the same number of cars driving around on the roads, but we won't have any cars parked alongside the roads because there's no requirement. And we won't own the cars. We'll just have like a phone subscription service or something. When you need a car, you ask for the car, and the next car pulls in like a taxi, picks you up and drops you off wherever you want to go. And if you want to drive to Aberdeen from London, then you get in the car and it drives you to Aberdeen. The thing is that there'll be no cars parked alongside the roads, and the roads will be equally busy because the number of cars that drive around, there's no real requirement for there to be more or less cars. Maybe there won't be people in work as much, so there won't be rush hours. But generally speaking, people still need to get from A to B, so they'll just get in the car. So the roads will still be busy, but there won't be cars parked down the side of the roads anymore because there's no requirement for it. So
it reminds me a little bit.
Could people take up cycling? Yeah. So maybe
the Black Mirror episode where they do the match, the 99% match or whatever, and it drives them to the house and then just drives off on its own.
99% match.
The couple.
Oh yeah, that's a great episode. Yeah. Well, we were going to talk about Black Mirror. I know we've been going on a bit, but perhaps we do that another time. But all I'm saying is, I think that technology will solve a lot of the problems we currently don't seem to have an answer for. But it's also going to create a whole lot of problems that most people seem to be blissfully unaware of at the moment. And when I hear people talking about universal basic income as if it's a philosophical or a matter of, I don't think it's right because people are lazy and they don't deserve to work, or I think people should be entitled to money and blah, blah, blah because they're oppressed by a system that doesn't allow them to prosper. I mean, all of these arguments, in my view, are really old-fashioned and unnecessary because regardless of your philosophical point of view, there will be a requirement to deal with this problem of unemployment, which is coming over the horizon.
I know what you're saying, but I would argue that the only way that you know that it's right or wrong is using philosophy. So I'm
not having a dig at philosophy. I'm simply saying that philosophy, this is an acute problem, or very shortly will become an acute problem. And in order to deal with it, we need to start preparing for it in the best way we know now.
Why would you deal with it then?
Because otherwise it's going to create all sorts of issues.
Why is that bad?
So if you know that a storm wave or tsunami waves are coming, then it's a good idea to build.
Why is it a good idea?
See, this is what I mean. Anyone who's listening at this point, this is what I mean, the philosophical arguments about this. So if you live in a village, right, and you're by the sea and periodically it floods for whatever reason, or you live by a big river and it floods, then it's a good idea to prepare in advance to safeguard. Why wouldn't it be?
Why not? Why not just sort of let it kill you off?
Yeah, I'm not even going to go there.
It's a philosophical conversation.
Yes, but it's also pointless.
Well, I mean, the reason why you would want to have that conversation about why it's a good thing, that's a philosophical conversation.
Yeah, but I'm saying that we don't need to have that philosophical conversation about this. There are things that we have got no answer to. This is maybe not an acute problem right now, but becoming an acute problem. It's coming, and we need to prepare for it. You need to prepare for all sorts of things in life. If you're going to get married, you don't just tool up at the church with no preparation. It just won't go right. Well, you might do. You probably save you £40,000 or whatever it is, and you just have such a good day anyway. But you're not going to have all the members of your family there that you might want, and things require preparation. If you have to do an exam, you don't just tool up to the
Some
thing.
people do though, right? Some people get married on a whim, and some people.
Yeah, and maybe there's an argument that for some people that's actually no bad thing, right? Most people wouldn't do. I've always done pretty well with exams. For whatever reason, I've always been quite good at exams. So for me, I could probably tool up to most exams and pass them without any prior knowledge, depending on the exam. If it's a sort of advanced chemistry or something, I don't think I'd do very well. But or some kind of language other than Spanish or English. But generally speaking, for most sort of subjects, I could probably do fairly well.
Theoretical physics,
maybe not being one of them, but but my point is that there are some problems that are coming. Actually, that reminds me of another thing I just want to say before the end, and I know we've been going on and on and on, but we had a discussion at some point. I think possibly it was about veganism. I can't remember, but one of the comments that we got was that they didn't like what we were saying because they wanted an argument on both sides. They wanted a balanced view. So what they really wanted is for you to be really pro-veganism and me to be really anti-veganism. And I've just got to put my oar in here and say that I categorically disagree with that. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that we are used to in debates and stuff like this, where someone will come with a predetermined point of view and try their hardest to win an argument to prove to the other person that their point of view is right and that the other person's point of view is wrong, and vice versa. And I think that's such an outdated concept.
You mean like a mock debate?
Like a mock debate, like some kind of thing where, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have got so much time for How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And in it, he says that he used to be the chairman of his local debating. He says, to my shame, I was the chairman of my local debating club or whatever. Some words to that effect. I forget exactly what he said, but it was along those lines. You have a better memory for these things. You might remember it better than I do. But nevertheless, he was shamed by it because that's not what discussion should be about. That's not what sharing ideas is about, because you're closing yourself off if you do that to the other person's point of view and perspective. And one thing I can tell you, if we look at the current state of UK politics, for example, as just an example, or generally politics, it's just the same thing. You've got someone on the left arguing their point, someone on the right arguing their point. Neither of them are listening to the other person's perspective. And by definition, they both can't be right. And they're probably both wrong. So they're not getting anywhere. It's just wasting everybody's time. And they're feeling all intellectual about it. But they're not actually achieving anything. I think it's far more important to come to a discussion with an open mind and actively listen to the other person and say what you feel, what you think, what your position is. But I certainly want to come to a discussion, or if I'm listening to a podcast, I want people to challenge my ideas. I want people to say something new, something fresh, something that makes me think, I hadn't thought of that.
There are certain ideas that you wouldn't do that with, though, right?
I know you're going to talk about fascism now.
I was about to use the white supremacist example. You wouldn't go into a conversation with a white supremacist and think, maybe I'll keep an open mind here, because I might be persuaded to be a racist at the end of this.
No, you're right. I wouldn't, but that's...
So how would you know the difference between those topics?
I think there is a fundamental balance of whether something is detrimental to others or not. And if a white supremacist there's all sorts of... this is a whole topic of... we could do a whole conversation on this as well.
If we're not careful, we will.
But you always bring this up.
It's a good analogy.
Because
you're saying that you should be open-minded in conversation with people. And for
yes,
me...
but you know that I have an intolerance to those kind of views as well.
Why, though?
Well, because I have bias, but also because...
surely it's because it's correct, though.
Stop trying to bait me into saying
it's
something.
It's not bias, is it? You have a bias against it, fair enough, but it's not because it's an emotional thing. It's wrong. It's quite clearly wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong because it's based on fear and ignorance. And it's
they
also...
would say that it's based on some sort of evidence that they can produce.
the best thing they could produce would be pseudoscience.
I agree.
It doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and it has detrimental effects on other people. So if you are treating another person as an inferior, for whatever reason, that's got to be wrong. You can't just go, well, I don't like black people because white people are better, because that's just, where does that even come from? That's just nonsense. And
it's
or don't like to dilute. Don't dilute the bloodstream, as if there's some specific thing that makes white people better than anyone else. Or I mean, you could say the same about any other group of people who might hold similar views. I mean, we were talking about white supremacists at this point, but it's all. I mean, they'd hate this. They hate me to say this, but it's all the same. It doesn't matter. It's just a bigotry, a form of bigotry and bias that they have got, and any particular group of people can come up with a similar kind of bias. And it's not, if you're black, then you can't be a white supremacist by definition, I suppose. But at the same time, you could still have equally harmful and detrimental views, and they're all wrong in my view. I think they're all wrong because you're victimizing another group of people. And
you just alluded to something, which was evidence, and the fact that it's correct evidence. And you have to go through that process in order to determine whether something is correct or not.
Okay, sure.
And so when you say, well, we shouldn't be having this conversation about universal basic income, that's the process you would go by.
Except that the evidence is pretty strong and compelling, that we need to find a solution for a problem, and arguing about whether it's a good thing or how we're going to afford it or any of these other things is not actually putting that mental energy into solving the problem. It's just arguing about whether this is the right thing to do or not. I think it's a bit of a red herring, and I think most modern politics is like a red herring as well. It's like arguing about Brexit and this, that, and the other, and about whether
I think Brexit's a talking point now.
Yeah,
it's just one of those things that people will tune into, so they're going to keep churning that subject.
Just so boring, and
we're talking about it.
Well, because it impacts us, and it's just a never-ending saga. Just like get on with it, Either do Brexit, find out that it was a great idea or a ridiculous idea, but just get on with it, or shelve it and say it was the most ridiculous concept that anyone's ever come up with, and let's move on. But what I can't stand is this. I mean, now we've got another group of, well, lovely people who are vying, career politicians, let's just say, who are vying to get the top job and become the next prime minister in this country. I mean, for what? For what purpose? And what happens with prime ministers when they stop being a prime minister? They usually go on to make millions and millions. I mean, if you look at, as public speakers and all sorts of things. I mean, it's a part of a career. It's not. What I find really depressing is that modern politics is the same as supporting a football team, right? You choose a team to support, and that's the team you support, right? And was it a penalty? Well, that was never a penalty. No way was that a penalty. And you speak to someone on the other side, that was definitely a penalty. Definitely. Because there's an intrinsic bias in it, and you're always going to support your tribe, your team. And modern politics is like that. You've got to be consistent. At some point in your early 20s, maybe, you decide, actually, I'm slightly to the left or slightly to the right or whatever it may be. And you've got to somehow remain consistent to that and and then they join a political party, and then you've got to toe the party line. You've got to, it's just a nonsense. Surely, I mean, okay, fine. It was the best system that we've had maybe for 500 years. Is it still the best system? Sitting there and me trying to convince you that I'm right and you trying to convince me that you're right. Is that really the best way forward? Or is it much more important to sit down and have an open discussion where you challenge my views on whether white supremacists are actually an all right group of people, or whether they're just scum? I happen to think that, that they're wrong. And whereas I know that we've talked about it before, and you said, well, should we send them all off to an island or whatever it was that you said?
This is the immigration debate, or a conversation.
Well, one of the things about this wall, though, going back to the wall that Trump was talking about, was he said, how are we going to? They were saying, how can we finance this wall? And he goes, well, we could put solar panels all along it, and it will produce electricity. That's a good idea. Except the Mexicans said, well, solar panels will need to be on the south side of the wall, and that's our side of the wall. So we're going to get the electricity in that case, mate. It's I don't know. There's so much hypocrisy in the current system.
I think we're forgetting the fact that the whole platform he ran on was that Mexico would pay for it.
Yeah,
I think
right.
He's getting enough stick for that, but that's the whole... that was our Plato discussion about the chocolate maker versus the doctor, the sweet maker, sweet shop owner, I think it was, and how we've elected more sweet shop owners than we have doctors.
Yeah. Well, we could go on and on and on.
Apparently, we can.
We certainly can, and go round and round in circles and touch upon the same thing that we've mentioned many, many times before, which clearly are of importance. In terms of at least my perception and your perception, certainly you're pretty keen on saving the environment,
but because that impacts human beings, not because I'm a tree hugger. We need to look after the place that we live in, because if we don't, then it's going to be detrimental for our health and safety. And when I say we, I do mean we, but I mean everyone
collectively.
Yeah.
Well, then watch Chernobyl, because that's a good example of where it really goes catastrophically badly, and we're using things that we don't really understand enough, which, if you get wrong, and Murphy's Law says that if it can go wrong, it will go wrong, then we really need to up our level of understanding. So perhaps AI is the solution. And for that reason, perhaps a good film to watch would be I Am Mother. Although, you might not sleep very well if you watch these movies, really. But,
yeah.
Anyway.
Would you like to close? Thought of the day or anything?
Thought of the day, I think I just think. Just think. My favourite word, by the way. Word of the day, think. I know we've already had a word of the day, but I really like the word think. I don't like the concept that someone tells you something, you just do it. Think about it. Give it some thought. And I know that you love philosophy and all the rest of it, and that is essentially just thinking, isn't it, really? Just pondering all sorts of things. Don't take anything for granted.
To direct one's mind towards someone or something, use one's mind actively to form connected ideas.
That's think, is it?
Yeah.
There you are. Think.
All right then. Until next time.
See you later.